Yosef's first actions as king were to change the primary title back to Wallachia and move the capital back to Targovishte. He also had the unfinished Black Castle in Bacau demolished and the stones thrown into the sea, along with the brazen bull and all the remains of those who carried the Witch Queen's vile blood in life. Though they could not find her bones, they tossed her ashes into the Black Sea regardless. Then King Yosef made peace with Nicopolios and set about fixing the damage the last von Boppard had done. Meanwhile, in the rest of Europe, a multitude had occurred in the last 50 years. The Golden Horde had invaded by sea and won Ireland for itself, and by 1377 was beginning its encroachment into England, which was already caught up in a war with Norreger. The Papal State, still under the Western Protectorate, was getting weaker, and the tiny county of Vassalina in the Alps under Count Septimio seceded, unopposed. Armeniacon had reached yet another zenith of power, with borders in the northernmost in Crimea and in the southernmost in the Horn of Africa. It stood as the largest empire in the known world at that time. The Zamfara Federation halted their westward expansion, and Crusader Ouagadougou was holding its own against the surrounding tribes. Navarre and Milano were constantly quarreling over the Pyrenees, and finally Deutschland was thriving in an era of relative peace. Over the next few years, King Yosef would build a series of castles along the Greek islands belonging to Wallachia, and more generally along the border with Armeniacon. He also redistributed titles to his courtiers that had once been hoarded by the Witch Queen. On the 18th of February, 1380, King Yosef died at the age of 57. His rather short rule characterized by peace and a return to normalcy. As such, his son Maximos III ascended to the throne at the age of 32. On the 1st of April, King Maximos III converted to the heresy of Orthodox Christianity, leaving his Massalian faith. This also, incidentally, made him the ecumenical patriarch of the struggling heresy, giving him a vested interest in spreading the faith himself and making it dominant once more over Bogomilism, which still had not formalized. Meanwhile, by this point, Wallachia had long since developed its spiritual tapestry that it would be so characterized by in the histories to come. Running in a solid, central line from north to south lies the Bogomilist majority, while places near land borders and with a predominantly Greek ethnicity house the Massalians, the Catholic minority to be found along the coasts, and finally the Orthodox faithful, which mostly centralized itself around Targovishte and parts of central Greece. Meanwhile, far to the east, the Seljuks had been slowly pressed between the Golden Horde and Rajasthan on either side, their realm being eroded like land carved beneath great, slow-moving glaciers. As such, the Sunni Khalifa al-Qadir decided to call a jihad upon the Golden Horde and its leader, Khan Burkhan Satrak, with the goal of returning land south of the Hindu Kush to the Seljuk Shah Reza the Zealot. Many considered this the final stand of the last independent Muslim realm. 500 years prior, they had control of the entirety of the Middle East, even laying claim to Siberia for a brief time, and the Caliph resided in a grand palace in Baghdad. Now, they barely held on to life near the banks of the Arabian Sea, and the Khalifa was a subject of the Armeniacon, who also lorded over Mecca and Medina, allowing them to fall to ruin. If this jihad were to fail, it would mean the possible eradication of Islam as a political force, consigned to obscurity and powerlessness. In 1384, at yet another zenith of their power, Armeniacon lost a major independence revolt, and dozens of minor kingdoms seceded from the empire, only to be followed immediately by another series of revolts. On the 30th of June, 1385, a son was born to King Maximos III, named Cyprian. On the 1st of July, King Maximos III gave his friend and godfather of the prince the ecumenical patriarchate, making him Ecumenical Patriarch Methodios II. On the 20th of October, after a conversation with a close friend, King Maximos III converted to the Bogomilist faith, abandoning his Orthodox heresy. This also made him the first king of Wallachia to have passed between 3 different religions during his reign. By the 4th of May 1387, Deutschland had made the Kingdom of Norreger a tributary. However, the exertion of such a task also allowed for the mostly peaceful secession of Holland under its first king Grafo Landolt of House Sild. On the 10th of June 1388, the so-called Last Jihad failed, and all seemed lost for the Seljuks, who had nothing more to do but wait to die. That was until Khagan Kubilai Kachigun of Rajasthan converted from the Jain faith to Sunni Islam in his desire for greater opportunities for conquest. In 1391, King Maximus III, known as the Holy after undertaking the Consolamentum, began construction of the first observatory in Europe. Meanwhile, the Golden Horde under Khan Burkhan was absorbing the kingdoms which were flaking off and away from the realm of the Armenia Khan, which was languishing in a slow decline under Basilius Sicinios the Monster, who was insane and in a great deal of debt. In September, Deutschland reconquered the Dutch lowlands and annexed Denmark from Milano. In February of 1392, the Golden Horde laid claim to Siberia, thus unseating Armenia Khan as the largest empire in the known world. On the 27th of January 1393, the Golden Horde launched an embargo war upon Wallachia in an attempt to redirect their trade routes and take great deals of tribute by force. As such, King Maximus the Holy raised over 35,000 men to defend the kingdom, while Khan Burkhan, slayer of the Seljuks, brought down the full force of his horse army at over 50,000 men. As the king was rallying his forces in Podolia in order to invade through Rus, the Khan had hired the mercenary army of Captain Caspar to invade from the west. This Neapolitan was once from a great merchant family that was pressed too harshly by Xistus III, and as such he found his fortune in mercenary work. The Khan had paid handsomely, enough to restore his family name, and so launched his attack of 25,000 men from Olmütz in Deutschland through Wallachia's western border. King Maximus had to make a choice, and he decided to leave Captain Caspar to pillage and bring the northwestern border provinces to ruin, while he continued on with his own united force into Mongol territory in the hopes of ending the war before the Khan could bring his horses down from their capital of Aval in the mountains. He misunderstood the sheer speed of the Mongol forces, however, and his siege of Kiev was interrupted by 25,000 men, making it the Battle of Kiev in October of 1393. Another mistake for King Maximus, the army of Captain Caspar met up with the main Mongol force and flanked the Wallachian forces instead of raiding and pillaging as he had initially supposed. As such, these two mistakes cost the king the day, and his 7,000 remaining men shambled back to Podolia to regroup. Meanwhile, on the 10th of December, it was revealed that the Khan had sent 15 ships filled with soldiers across the Black Sea and paid the Armenikites for use of the Bosporus, launching two separate invasions of southern Greece at Varoria and Achaia. Another 15 ships would pass through a week later, landing at Epiros. When 204 more ships landed at Thrake, carrying thousands of these brutal soldiers, King Maximus the Holy was forced to surrender, and lost the war on the 27th of March, 1394. Incidentally, that very night he was killed by a snake in his bed, leaving his young son, King Cyprian II, to ascend to the throne at the age of 8. In 1396, papal subjects who were tired of the embarrassed, prostrate empire to which they belonged, sailed to Spain, took the papal lands along the Pyrenees by force, and raised their flag in open rebellion. Meanwhile, King Cyprian II was peculiar, especially in the fact that he refused to take a Greek name, breaking a tradition that was also admittedly peculiar but long-lived nonetheless. On the 20th of June, 1401, the regency for King Cyprian II ended, and he promptly became possessed. He also went completely bald at 16, which wasn't a promising start to his rule. Many spread rumors that he may have been inbred, but those rumors were unfounded. Later that month, the papal rebels were defeated. On the 12th of June, 1402, the Seljuk Turks were forced to relinquish their imperial title, making Shah Reza Selçuklar the last Shah. Left with a single county at the edge of the world, their ancestral Khorasan, the Seljuks were no longer to be feared or even considered. The world no longer knew the terror of the Turkish marauders, no longer feared the name of Islam. The Hajj was no longer even possible, and hadn't been for over a century. The tired old Shah Reza Selçuklar, blinded in one eye and battered from his last fight with the Golden Horde, disappeared that night. In the morning, a camel, as well as some food and water, were missing. He left his headdress on his bed, as well as his sword. No living family, or even relatives, his departure marked the end of a bloodline that had endured for 514 years. Some think he went on the Hajj to ruined Mecca, the first and possibly last Muslim to do so in over 100 years. Some thought he went east, seeking seclusion and a new life. Others just claimed he fled, terrified at the prospect of Mongol capture. Whatever the case, the Seljuk chapter had ended, this time for good, leaving Rajasthan as the last Muslim realm. A daughter was born to King Cyprian, meanwhile, in 1403, whom he named Ruxandra. In November of that year, he fathered a bastard son, whom he legitimized, named German. In 1404, King Cyprian II had himself coronated in the Orthodox tradition, making him an Orthodox king. In 1405, Turkestan seceded from the Golden Horde, causing them to lose their claim on the Siberian wastes. And on the 24th of January 1406, King Cyprian II died in a carriage accident at the age of 20, leaving his 2-year-old bastard, King German, to ascend to the throne.